Hey YouTube, I'm just putting together a small blog on audio and my experiences in audio as a repair tech and as a live engineer. A lot of my techniques, I sort of think outside the box. I make my own microphones. I've dabbled with various amps. I restored various valve amps over the years from Laney's, Marshalls, Sound Cities, High Watts, Fenders. Currently working on a couple of really old rare valve amps at the moment. Early 60s Vox AC30 in blonde, and late 60, well, it's made between 68 and 72 Silverface Fender Twin. Having a few, having a couple of little glitches with that, but we'll get there. So I'm also a live sound engineer. I've got an unusual PA system, unusual collection of mics that I use live that not many people use nowadays, going back to the 1950s. I use an old AKG D12 on my bass drum. I use a few Shure Unisphere 565s. Got one in gold, which is Horseman's Bling. But I call it I like it because I call it my stage bling. So I'm going to talk about eventually what boards I use, more of my microphone choices, the speakers that I use in my rig, the amp rack that I use, different amps, how they sound, how power supplies affect your tone, even guitar magnets and pickups, and now they affect the overall sound of things. In fact, even cables make such a difference. Like, you can use good quality shielding. You can use it all varies, and how there's a lot of nonsense involved with it. Like, people are trying to get you to buy these £100 cables. Yes, there's an element of truth in they can improve your sound, but I've used cheap cables and various bits and pieces over the years, and I've not had any problems. But I repair all my cables, and I'm the only one using my kit. But if I was to hire out kit to professional musicians, my gear doesn't work because a lot of it's not rider friendly. So I've done things for me to create a sound for me, and people either love it or hate it. My methods are very backwards. Like, if you're using a recording desk live, for example, I use a couple of Studio Master mixing desks live, and the auxiliary sends on the desk are post fade. So every time you alter your fader, you end up affecting what's going through the sends to your band's monitors or your reverb units or your delays, blah 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 blah. So I try not to use reverbs, delays. Well, it depends on the room, depends on the style of music that you're doing and the sound system. I've done some gigs in some rooms that people go, oh yeah man, great acoustics. But really, when you get down to it, you've got 40-foot ceilings, you've got solid concrete walls and everything, and it's just, it doesn't work. It becomes a sound man's nightmare. And then when you start putting time delay effects like reverbs and delays, it ends up bouncing off the walls, and then it goes back down your mics, and you can get feedback that way, and it just, to me, it doesn't sound right. It's all about if you've got a good system, it's all about the room. And I find that so many engineers as well, everybody's got their own methods of working. I'm not saying anybody's wrong, and I don't want people to say I'm wrong, because at the end of the day, there's more than one way to skin a cat, and I bought the equipment that I could afford to buy. I'm working within a budget. I have to. I can't just go out and buy the latest digital mixing desk or the latest lab group and power amplifier or the whatever microphones are the end thing. I have to find what works best for me and what I can afford. So over the years, I've just bought the equipment that I can afford. And I've been very lucky before before the whole vintage boom came about with eBay and whatever. I've had old Shure Unisphere mics for years, and I've had a couple of AKG D12s for years before the values just skyrocketed, and it's the same with old Marshalls. A lot of these valve amps and various bits that are taking in the kudos, like in the whole, yeah man, must have vintage. Yeah, a lot of this stuff is overrated, but it does have a lot of it does have a unique characteristics that a lot of modern recordings and a lot of methods can't reach it. You can come close, but you'll never quite have the same mojo. I mean, for instance, one of my methods, whenever I do a gig live, I purposely redline my mic preamp sometimes on my board, and I get a really nice bluesy, distorted, crunchy vocal sound. When you go to college, when you go to school, whatever for audio, you're really told you shouldn't really do things like this. But for me and what I do, my sound, it works. Although it's not for everyone. And sometimes music's not all about being perfect, being about having everything compressed and limited, blah 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 blah. Sometimes it's just about the rawness and capturing the moment. That's what I like to do whenever I do sound for a live gig. Yeah, I'm quirky. My rig's beat up. It's 30 to 40 years old. And it still works. Although people cringe whenever they look at it, and I've had some people use my rig and go, "Ooh, dear jock." But overall, I'm sort of happy with what I've got. I've created something for me. And I've not had any problems. People within music, within any sort of industry, you're going to get people who are going to go, "Okay, this is wrong, that's wrong, that's wrong, I recommend you try this." And sometimes you just got to sit down and listen to what these engineers are saying to you. Because, man, they might give you a tip that you'd never actually think about, or recommend a certain microphone, for instance, that you've never seen or heard before. I've done gigs. Well, I'm gonna talk about my microphones in a minute. I'm gonna do another video because this is just a brief introduction. But I use a lot of microphones and various other bits that people, A, they don't necessarily know about, B, you don't see them live because of the rarity, and C, a lot of them are just so blooming expensive that your average sound engineer can't afford them. And a lot of these old mics have got their own quirks and their own flaws where they failed. Even mixing boards, guitar pedals, guitar amps, there's certain various bits that if you're to run a vintage rig or to run vintage amps, you have to look after your equipment. Well, it's like any job really. If you've got a car that's known to be problematic, if you look after it, you're less likely to run into any problems or issues. I've had people say, "Oh, my old gear is not very reliable, this, that, and the other." But everything is as reliable as, well, nothing's perfect. Everything's got its own little problem, and it's how you deal with the problem and keep the things running. And you just have respect for the equipment. I'm sort of putting out there a tutorial so that people can ask questions on my methods, what mics I use, how do I get a certain sound, who I've worked with. I mean, I don't want it to become a bit of a name-dropping, egotistical thing. So we're all here to have a laugh and post some constructive criticism. And I'm sure I'm going to get a few hate comments, but hey man, it's all fun. I've got a reputation for doing live sound for some quite big hitters. I've done the Skinhead reunion down in Brighton. I've become a bit of a joker there. Yeah, the long-haired hippie's got the sound. But I started out in folk music years ago with a family studio back in Scotland. Like, we never had much money. We had to use just whatever we could afford to get by. And sometimes you have to use what you've got to create a certain sound. Like, you can use one microphone to do an acoustic guitar and voice, and you have to learn mic placement and EQ in order to catch both the mic and the voice at the same time. You could be recording in a bathroom. You could be recording in an old barn. You could be recording with an old Tascam Porta Studio 4-track. That's where I started in the mid to late, very early 90s when he had the family studio. And going back to 1998, we had a home studio and we produced one of the earliest home recordings in the Highlands of Scotland with our studio, and very early CD recording that didn't fail. Grampian Records at the time were just coming out of producing cassette tapes, if I remember right. Sorry, it's a long time, and I'm not meaning to sound like I'm slagging anyone off or get my information wrong. Like I said, I'll change whatever's necessary. But my background in sound engineering and sound goes back to folk music, where I've had to learn how to make things sound good with very minimal equipment. Like, we had a Roland PA 200 8-channel mixing desk. We had Tascam 424, I think it was either a Mark 1 or Mark 2. We've had DCC, digital compact cassette. We've had mini disc. We've been there and used it all to record in the early to mid 90s. And that's how we've done it. So it's a case of do or die. Really, make use of what you've got. Learn how to you learn your tools and your tricks of the trade. And nowadays, I'm an analog guy. I'll stick with analog. I know where I stand in how to manipulate the audio, but that's not necessarily the way you want to go. You need to learn digital. You need to learn this, that, and to be honest, I'm happy doing things with my old desks. Yeah, they're inferior. I've got a few people going, "Oh, you're using this, you're using that," but at the end of the day, I'm happy. And if anybody's got any questions or they want to put some comments in about what I do, my methods, I mean, I'm going to be doing a series of videos on electrical safety, especially when it comes to valve amps and the importance of keeping everything looked after. Microphones, how to look after them, various different types of microphones, and talk about my preferences and my choices of mixing board, what brands I like to use, and just general shenanigans, really. But I'm a live sound engineer as well as a recording. I record my gigs. I'm authentic. It's not perfect by any means, but my recordings have life, and to me that's what it's all about. It's like capturing the moment. And I've had conversations with a few engineers who have a similar approach to mine, but they apply it to their they applied it to their studio. I'm not mentioning any names at the moment, but they basically said it's all about live. It's all about the authenticity of the recording. Recordings and live music, it's not meant to be pitch perfect. It's not meant to have auto detune. It's supposed, for me anyway, it's all about capturing that feeling and capturing that moment when you've got four guys in the studio, for example. They might be throwing a wobbler and about to punch the living puddings out of each other, but that's part of the magic. Anyway, I'll talk to you soon. Bye.